Anastasia Marie Yarbrough is a voice and wellness coach. She helps people find their voices, express their authentic selves, and reclaim their lives. Her approach draws on lived experience and background as a music educator, voice and strings teacher, somatic movement educator, classical musician, jazz and R&B singer, facilitator. She's also a critical animal studies researcher, a natural history practitioner, and a survivor. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, Anastasia.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, I don't know anything about what we're going to talk about today, but I do know what it is to be vegan, and I love hearing people's vegan stories. Can you share what got you onto the pathway?
Yeah, I think I was introduced to the word vegan when I was in high school, and it was a teacher who didn't last long in my high school, but he was the only teacher who was vegan, and he and this punk rocker I was hanging out with were telling me that there was an alternative to being vegetarian, which was what I was practicing at the time. And I spent some time really reflecting on how I wanted to show up with animals, with nature. And I spent about 3 years mulling it over until I arrived in college. And by this time, I was 19 years old. And I decided I was going to do it. I was like, I'm going to be vegan. And back then, back in 2003, 2004, it was not as easy as it is now. So I struggled with figuring it out. I didn't really have any mentors, but 20 odd something years later, like here I am, and I'm loving it. It's the way that I live, it's how I carry myself, and I don't have any qualms with it. And it's become more than just how I came to it when I was younger. So when I was younger, it was all about, a certain idea of animal rights. Particularly, I was influenced by PETA and Pete Singer at the time, but it has since evolved into something much more holistic and grounded in a decolonizing liberatory practice that's interspecies oriented, and it really challenges me to experiment with empathy and challenge myself beyond where I thought I ever could be. So not to put all that weight on just veganism, because it's not really that big, but that's kind of what it's become for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is kind of big. In For me personally, it's a continuous learning process. It seems like that there's things that I've just kind of grown up with that I take for granted. This is the way things work, and then the vegan perspective comes in and says, "Hang on, maybe." That's part of this kind of dominion over attitude that permeates so much of our world, that we're taught to embrace that. It seems like by eating animals from when we're really young, and that's nobody's fault, right? I mean, that's just what our parents did, and they didn't know any better. But I don't know. For me, it's just like peeling an onion. There's just more and more kind of awareness. Is that what you're referring to, or?
Yeah, I think it's more that it's become part of how I carry myself, part of my DNA, if you will. And so it feels very natural. It feels doable, and it feels sustainable, at least with how I'm living here in the United States. It feels very sustainable. And I don't spend as much time as I used to in in vegan circles, mainly because I didn't find the kind of community that I was hoping for among self-identified vegans. So that has I haven't necessarily grown in that respect with other humans, but I just think that the more it becomes a part of oneself, and the more normal it feels, like the more transformative it is. And And the more it feels like this is something that I can work with for my lifetime, you know.
Yeah.
It's not just a passing thing. It's not just a quick solution. It really is like a long-term commitment that becomes much more than just the sound bites that I originally received as a kid.
Yeah, yeah. I like to think that, the values of like respect for all beings and for their right to exist on their own terms without being used for entertainment or for any other purpose. If I don't know, I just kind of hold hope that if more and more humans can embrace that and really live that then that's going to extend to our other human companions as well, right? That we can take the values that we now realize we need to share with animals and the way we live with respect for them. If we can use that to build a nicer human community, maybe we can end the wars and stop all the profiteering and just living for the purpose of materialism. We can find a deeper meaning. I try to get into that a little bit personally myself. I don't know if you want to speak to that, or if do you want to dive in and tell me what it is about what this work that you're doing. So this is kind of a lifetime of work as well that has evolved for you. What is it? Being vocal. I'm interested to hearing how you got involved with this.
Yeah, so the name of my company is Being Vocal Freedom, and I call what I do voice and wellness coaching. It comprises of a variety of modalities and pedagogies related to how you teach the voice. It also includes musical training, what we call musicianship, and it involves this somatic movement awareness, which is a big part of how I approach helping people connect with their voices in a tangible way and express them and create more space and thus more freedom for their voices to emerge. And so I am in my second year of training with Alexander Technique. So the Alexander Technique informs a great deal of what it is that I do in somatic movement education. But I also have a background in various spiritual modalities that involve what we call today somatics, and a lot of going within oneself and having a deeper understanding of how sensation moves in one's body, how emotions move, and how the voice plays a part in giving those emotions room to express, and how that expression is necessary for our overall mental, emotional, and our overall well-being.
Cool. So, can you explain what the Alexander technique is?
Yeah, the Alexander Technique was established by this man, FM Alexander, as we know him. And he was from Australia originally. He was an actor at the time in the late 1800s. So he was an orator kind of actor in that he recited scripts, and particularly Shakespeare. He recited lines from Shakespeare. And he had this issue where every time at the end of a show, he left feeling hoarse and fatigued. And so he went to the doctor of the time, and they checked him out, and they said, "Hey, there's nothing wrong with you. There's no underlying condition that we can solve medically." And so then he began to think, well, perhaps it's something that I'm doing that's causing this problem. So he took the time to observe himself, and by watching himself in a three-way mirror and spending time over and over again repeating the actions of going to speak. And he noticed a habit that he had where he was shortening the back of his neck and collapsing his head on his neck. And so he began to then explore, well, what would happen if I didn't do that? And out of this tinkering, he discovered what we call now the technique, the process of how one notices a habit in themselves, how they pause, and then try something else from within, so that ultimately the idea is that your body will correct itself by intervening with that particular habit. That's that in a nutshell. And what we call what he worked with, we call that primary coordination. He called it primary control. I call it primary coordination. The the idea that when we don't interfere with the eye head neck communication, then that frees up the rest of the body to orient around that and to create more space and more freedom, and ultimately more sense. Like we can actually sense kinesthetically more of ourselves just through the release that that primary coordination can create throughout the body. And
Cool.
then we
Yeah.
just try to return to that over and over and over again
Right.
for the rest of our lives.
Well, and I practice yoga. Yoga is kind of my core health, spiritual practice, and a lot of that, of course, is about alignment, right? And making sure that the head is on top of the shoulders and the shoulders are on top of the hips, and that whole alignment. And there's a lot of discussion about how, the traditional way of living in our world is so different than now, where we're forward moving. We're like forward to the computer. We're forward onto our phone, and it's really affecting this very important connection in the neck spine that they call it. So that's really cool that he's so primary coordination, right? And so it's sort of working on an energetic level, and because you talked about the space that for sound, creating space for sound as well. That seems like a really sort of energetic thing.
Yeah, it can be in a spiritual yogic sense, and also in a physical sense. I mean, well, sound itself is energy. It's and we experience it in the form of vibration and waves. And so it is literally energy moving through our bodies. And we can also feel the kinetic energy between the molecules in our bodies as well. And we can feel that sensation when we expand our kinesthetic sense and just become a bit more sensitive. So for someone, let's say, who is working with chi, they can feel that chi through an expanded sensitivity of their kinesthetic sense, and they can feel it like heat moving in different directions. And in Alexander technique, we can feel that as well. We just may not name that as such. It depends on the teacher, really. Like if the teacher is coming from an energy healing background as well, then they might incorporate that into their teaching. I personally don't have an energy healing background, so I don't refer to that language as much, but many of my clients do seek out energy healing from elsewhere, so they end up connecting the dots for themselves, which is perfectly fine, and I think actually more valuable than me telling them otherwise, if they can make those meaningful connections for themselves.
Cool. Yeah, it's really interesting how like this very basic kind of energy healing has so many different expressions in our world. Like that's called the chi. In yogic practice, we call it the prana. We practice pranayama, the breathing, the breath, and the power of the breath. Right. And breath is such an amazing thing that when you think about how our bodies breathe 24/7 regardless, we can't stop it. I mean, it's we can't willfully stop it. Eventually it stops, of course, and for various reasons, but whether we're sad or happy or sleeping or awake, this breathing thing happens. And so it seems like part of what you're doing also is kind of plugging into that energy, then this natural rhythm that happens, and just helping that facilitate naturally. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that in a nutshell, help to facilitate that naturally. So I help people, I try my best, and I usually am successful, but I'm not always successful at helping people get out of their own way. So when people come to me, and especially if they have a particular goal with singing or expressing their truth or just feeling better, it's a such a they're so focused in the goal that they are willing to manipulate themselves without even realizing that they're manipulating themselves and interfering what with the magic that's already there. And so when it comes to breathing, I work with people to help them return to that natural magic of breathing so that the less it's forced and controlled, the better. And that allows us to have more space, and by more space, I mean metaphorically, but also to feel a greater internal space between the molecules in the liquid of our organs, to feel that space and to feel the buoyancy of that without actively thinking about it. I do a lot of work that helps with getting out of this discursive thinking of trying to do it and just more experiencing sequences, movements, slow, thoughtful movements, but movements that will help people to breathe without thinking about breathing. But then it ends up all falling into place, and it kind of seems like magic, but it's really not. It's just us just kind of letting go of the interference for a time, and then getting the feedback, the deliciousness of what that feels like when we don't interfere. It ends up feeling like a high, and then people want more of it. And that's where the deeper long-term work of this journey comes into play.
Wow. Okay. So how are your clients finding you, and who are they, and what are they specifically coming to you for? Are they coming because they want to be better singers, or because they want to learn how to work more expediently with their breath? Or can you talk a little bit about your clients?
Yeah, most of them come to me through a Google search. Some of them come to me because they know somebody in the community. So I live in North Carolina. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and some people will know someone who knows me, and they'll refer them to me that way. And I have since been working with a variety of people with varying goals, ranging from I am in somatic therapy, and I want this work to pair with the work that I'm doing in somatic therapy, so it becomes like an additive to counseling. Some people have used it as, I want to become a better singer, but I want to do it in a way where I am kinesthetically aware of my body. And and then along those lines, some people have more specific musical goals, in that I want to be a jazz singer, I want to improvise, I want to be able to navigate a space musically and be able to carry my own in an ensemble as a singer, as a jazz singer. And then we have people who come to me who are like, I'm not singers at all, I'm afraid of singing, I'm terrified of it, I just want to feel better about my voice and not have these negative emotions around using my voice in public and speaking with people. And so we'll work on that. And then the final rare person who comes to me is the singer who's like, I have training as a singer, but my training has got me rigid, and I'm trying to unlearn some of that rigidity that I acquired through my formal vocal training.
Interesting. Yeah, the voice, right? The voice is such an amazing thing, really. And when I'm trying to think of, I don't remember when I started to speak, but most of us eventually do, and we find, our voice physically, and then there's a whole other meaning of finding your voice like in the world and feeling able to speak your voice and without fear of reprimand or judgment or whatever. And that, I think, shuts a lot of us down as we go along. And so, do you think there's a connection, like with the work that you're doing, and in sort of enabling the confidence to actually use your voice for what you're intending to use it for? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I do. Yeah, like whether it's singing or speaking, or what I call voicing to emote, just raw sound from emotions, all of that is what I work with. And it all connects, it all matters. And it all begins with that desire to communicate something, that desire to let something within move and come out in a way that is coordinated with your whole self. And you would know that it's coordinated with your whole self because it feels effortless. It feels easy. There's almost an impetus to push it in that direction when you let it move in that direction. And the more sensitive people become to that, and the more they allow that to happen, then the more they want it. They want the deliciousness of it. They want the power that comes with it, the energetic power, like literally the sonic power that comes with it, and also the catharsis that emerges from having expressed something and then feeling the echoing release from that. And it's just like this spaciousness. I imagine, the inner cave, where there's this vibrating sound of echoing throughout the cave. And even after the sound is dissipated, there's still like the tiniest bit of echoing remaining, but there's just this wide open space from which that tiny echo can travel, and the space feels larger because of it. And that's the image that I would say best captures like the after effect of having let the voice express and have space to do so.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of experiences in my life where I haven't felt able to speak, maybe a work situation, right? Where you kind of have to be diplomatic and you have to keep your vegan opinions to yourself or that sort of thing. And the stress that creates in the body as well. And I for a while there, I would just wake up in the morning with jaw clenched, and I thought, I think it's just because there's so much that I want to be able to say that I'm not able to say right now, and so it manifests in that way. And so it sounds like you would agree that that is something that can happen in our bodies as we
Mhm.
shut these voices, the sound down.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So important to re-energize that and allow that to happen. That's so cool what you're doing. And I'm also thinking about animals, right? I mean, when as vegan activists, we sometimes say that we're speaking for the animals because they can't speak, but really they do speak, don't they? They do speak. It's just that we don't necessarily understand what they're saying.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a trap, like with any other humans, especially humans who, I'm talking about vegans who care and want to be in that role of caretaker and representing for a vulnerable population. But yes, they do have voices. um if we're talking about mammals, like we all have larynxes. It's like we're all part of this great continuum of what it feels like to have a larynx. And so we evolve from the earliest mammals, these rodent-like mammals who who had the larynx and the impulse within to express breath over vocal folds in order to communicate something. And that something, it's, I like to imagine that that something was pure emoting. It was emotion traveling through the voice over and out. And so all the mammals who have emerged since then in the geological record, humans included, have that capacity within us. And so that's the bare basics of the larynx making sound. I mean, the primary function of it is actually for stability, and particularly like abdominal stability, like when we're carrying something, lifting something, and then also for preventing food from going down our airways. So it has that kind of that function to it first and foremost. But then somewhere along the lines, some mammals just sense within themselves that there was more to it. And the fact that we're part of that that legacy, if you will, is is very meaningful to me. I think about that often in my work, that we're part of this shared continuum of what it means to communicate and express oneself, and that magic that happens within when we let the breath touch the folds and sound comes out.
Mm-hmm. And certainly we can tell if an animal, this by the sounds that they're making, if they're happy or if they're in pain and suffering, like they're, we can at least interpret to that extent, right? So I'm thinking about, as you're speaking about evolution, and I did study some anthropology, and I understand that the human species evolved from Africa, and that's the oldest human remains that have been found in Africa. And so, so I try to think about, I'm thinking now about like, what was it then, as you say, we evolved this ability. There was something that was so important that we felt the need to actually form words and start communicating about it. And so you've mentioned that that African American cultural tradition is what has really influenced you in this work. And I'm just wondering, I'm just speaking words now about trying to piece all this brand new information together. So, what is it? What have you drawn, and what have you learned from your tradition of African American heritage that really informs the work that you're doing?
Well, first and foremost, it comes from lived experience. We start with where we are and who we are. And so, if, however, we grow up in the identities in which we are schooled, that's what we embody, whether we're aware of it or not. And my my acknowledgement of the influences of various African American traditions, particularly musical traditions, on me is more an awareness of how I'm situated in the identities that I've been schooled in, you know. And so I acknowledge I acknowledge jazz and blues and the gospel traditions, and I acknowledge Queen Afua and a lot of the folk spiritualities of the South, hoodoo in particular, and how they have shaped and informed where I am today. Um, but otherwise, there isn't anything unique or particular or exclusive about that. It's just naming my cultural position. And so if I were white, then I would hope that I would have the awareness to do the same in acknowledging from where my influence arises, how I've been schooled as a white person in that identity, and what cultures I've been washed in as a result, whether that was through through my family lineage or whether that was through some form of appropriation. I would hope that I would be conscious of that. And so that's why I named that, just to just to be respectful ultimately of what got me here.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, I mean, where I live, it's pretty multicultural in some senses. And I'm thinking of the Vancouver Folk Festival, where I've volunteered for many years, and they would bring musicians from all over the world. I mean, and it was just such a wonderful like music is just such a wonderful baseline. It feels like every culture has its traditions, as you suggest, but there's something that sort of interweaves between all of them as well. Like there's this voice that comes out of all of them, and but there's something about for me personally, just when I experience like indigenous cultural music with the drumming, especially, and kind of really traditional African rhythms. There's something that's just like really grounding there. That's like it's almost like the voice of the earth is being channeled through these drum rhythms and that sort of thing. So when you speak about um, appropriating culture, like I try to be careful not to do that, but at the same time, I really resonate with these traditions. So I mean that's okay, right? That's okay to do that. So I'm just wondering if you want to expound on any of that, or how you feel about what I've just said.
Um, I think I would just repeat more or less what I said before about how the awareness piece and the acknowledgement is part of the process in acknowledging where your knowledge comes from ultimately. And I try my best to do that, which is why if you go to my website, it's just a list of stuff because I'm just trying to acknowledge these schools of thoughts that have touched me in some way or another. Not all of them are African American of the US South, but they have still influenced me, and having the awareness and the humility to say that this has shaped my knowing, and even still I do not claim to know it. It's just part of, ultimately it's part of the work, it's part of the practice. And so whether I think that I'm appropriating, I don't claim to own it or be a master of it, nor am I making money off of selling these different traditions and these knowledge systems. That's where I would draw the line and reevaluate, but acknowledging one's influence and one's identity what they have and what they've been shaped and molded by. That's just, I think that's just wisdom, wisdom and practice, you know.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. Let's see. What else did you want to talk about? So, the connection between singing and mental health. Certainly, in this time, we're all. There's nothing like being alone with yourself to really bring the demons up to the surface, right? So, what can we do to just not be afraid of that process, and how can singing help us with our mental health challenges?
Well, there's the experience that people bring to me often when they come saying, okay, I'm going to take music lessons now because singing has always been my joy and I just haven't given it space or seriousness until now. And the pandemic has brought that out in a lot of people to be like, okay, I'm going to take this part of myself seriously and I'm going to invest in it. and in other ways, and then on the other side, you have the scientific studies that have been coming out over the last 5 years or so, mostly out of the UK, a little bit in Canada, and practically none in the US, about the relationship between singing and mental health, particularly in a communal context, and how group singing has that healing quality, and it mediates so many things that we need as a social species just through the single activity. Like there's not really a lot to it when you come together and you just sing, but it has all of these effects, these effects of mind and neurochemistry, and then you're syncing up with others and you're socializing through this media of singing, but you're not really dealing with the anxiety bits that come with socializing. And it just leaves people feeling better on average than when they arrived. And so in the UK, they've been integrating singing as a legitimate healing modality, or at least what they call singing for health as a legitimate healing modality in community health programs, particularly with seniors. Like senior choirs is a thing that's growing in the UK, but it's not exclusively with seniors. They're doing it with kids and with young adults as well. And how that plays into my work is I just notice intuitively and through just practical experience that the act of singing and learning how to sing, it helps people to have a greater awareness of themselves, so they're more likely to take better care of themselves. And I know that's kind of simple, and that could be like with anything, but singing is a very accessible way to do it because you don't need to buy equipment for it. Most likely you have a voice, whether you like it or not, and you have breath and you have a body. And so all of that stuff you have for free. You were born with it. You don't have to invest in any particular equipment to say, this fancy bicycle if you want to get into cycling. And even if you want to play another instrument, you don't have to invest in a trumpet or a viola, or piano. You can just come as yourself, and you can learn how to work with what's you by becoming more sensitive to the coordination that is you. And so because of that, I find that it's more accessible than other ways of self-care. And it has such a lasting effect on the whole being, what I would call the whole sentient being, because there's so many things at work. It's like you're working, you're thinking, and you're working your kinesthetic sense. You're ultimately improving your breathing, whether you realize it or not, and you're just coordinating better. And that trickles down into how you communicate and show up in the world and how you present yourself. And it becomes more and more fluid as you do it. So I would say it's singing and mental health. While I wouldn't get so far as to prescribe it for a particular ailment, like I wouldn't say, okay, you got bipolar, go sing this aria, but I would say, all in all, when it comes to just chronic distress and anxiety and even depression, that singing is a way, it's a path towards regulation that's readily accessible to most humans.
Yeah. I worked with developmentally disabled people for a while, and we going to their music program was just the highlight of their day, absolutely. And I was really inspired with just how they didn't care what they sounded like or who was listening, or there was no ego whatsoever. And I just really admired that, because when I go to sing, like I can carry a tune, but I don't really have that great of a voice. So I'm always really I'm not really confident, and I'm always really judging myself about my voice. So it sounds like the kind of work that you're involved with is helping people get over that as well, hey?
Yeah. And when it comes to singing for wellness, it's not really about the performance. I mean, really, it doesn't have to do with anybody other than you. It's about what the vibrational and kinesthetic experience you're receiving, and you're expressing whatever it is that you're emoting and soothing in that moment with singing. And so it can sound, judgments aside, it's going to sound the way it's going to sound, and however it sounds, it's right. That's the ultimate approach in singing for wellness. However you sound, it's right. If there's no pain, if there's ease, and if it's coming from that place of primary coordination, then it's right. you know I like to work with some things that have come out of music therapy and music psychology, things that they are showing that have an effect on our thinking and on our regulation, particularly when it comes to the vagus nerve. And one of those is earworms, of all things. So the earworm is like the sound that you audiate. So you voice in your mind's ear, in your imagination, and you do that on a loop, like ad nauseum, to the point where it just feels automatic, almost like a trance. And so it can be a melody from a song that you're just singing to yourself on loop. It could be a mantra that you're voicing in a kind of tonal way in your mind's ear on loop. And it has an effect where you just kind of reset around it without really doing anything else except letting that loop just loop.
Hmm.
And I like to explore that. I like to explore vocal toning, which comes out of yoga. And I like to explore what I've called singing selves, which is improvising a melody. So it's a song that you create, you improvise it, and it emerges from your ruminating thoughts. So whatever your thoughts are that's kind of keeping you stuck and they're ruminating, you can let them release on the voice in real time in a song. And that clears the space for a lot of things, and it works really well.
Cool. So, when I think of singing, I think of putting on a familiar song and singing along. But you're saying we could just, as we're doing our housework, washing the dishes, just start singing whatever's going on in your head and in your
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
That sounds fun. All right, and hopefully people are living with people who will appreciate that, and or find your own private space, I guess, and do that. Right? That sounds
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. Okay, so for that's a really great idea for people who want to get started. And then at what point would people contact you? So you're saying you're not necessarily just working with people who want to be professional musicians. You're working with anybody who's really interested in tapping into this inner power, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And to answer your question of when they would work with me or somebody like me, that would be when they reach a roadblock that they can't solve on their own. So I would serve as the coach, as a guide, to help you see what you're having trouble seeing or sensing in yourself in the moment. I would I would bring that out through a series of sequences, of exercises, explorations. We would find ways to where by the end of it, you would have greater insight in yourself and your own knowing after working with me. So that's what that's what I'm here for. I'm here to kind of be a guide for you to better know yourself. And it's when you can't do it on your own otherwise is where I step in.
Cool, right, yeah. And is this something that you can do online, I guess?
Yes. Yes, I have only been seeing clients online with the pandemic. And then I've also noticed too that it allows me to reach people outside of the area when we meet online. And it doesn't take away from the experience because a lot of times, I'm guiding with my words and we're doing sequences and movements together and we're doing voicings together. It ends up being as though we were in person. Albeit there's some minor differences, but otherwise it works pretty well over Zoom.
That's awesome. Is there anything else that you want to talk about before we go, Anastasia?
No, just to say that when it comes to working with our voices and when it comes to being in the world and relating with others, really it's all part of a great pattern. It's part of the same pattern. And if we can release into that pattern, or rather release into ourselves so that we can have like a greater picture of that pattern, then this will all start to make sense and it'll begin to feel like things go into place. Like, oh, I can use my voice and speak my truth with people I don't know. Like the limits that you had before in the past may suddenly feel a bit foreign because there were limits that weren't necessarily in accordance with the primary coordination that was your pattern. And by examining that more, you could see that, oh, I actually do have choices. I do have a way out of it. It's not just, oh, I'm limited in what I can say because of who I'm there. I'm actually placing that limit on myself. So what would happen if I release that? Like what would the coordination bring up then? And then that's where the magic, the excitement comes in.
It's
But
really it sounds like it's just the ultimate in self-love, learning to accept yourself for who you are and your limitations and then finding a way to get beyond all of that and just really embrace who you are, I guess.
yeah, but it'll come, it comes gradually and it doesn't come right away. And it doesn't really even come from self-talk. We can't talk our way there. It's just there's something eventually that clicks where we gather the insight from our bodies saying, oh, we can do this a different way. Why didn't I see it before? And I'm closing out with this to say that that has been my experience of this work so far, and it has been a game changer for me. And I hope that I can share it with as many people as possible, that game changer of how fast that shift can happen once we awaken to that click inside.
Cool. All right. And so your website is beingvocalfreedom.com.
Yes.
Anastasia Marie, you're also on Facebook. People can find you there. And so thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, Janine.